When the Battlefield franchise is mentioned, what's the first thing about it that pops into your mind? Large-scale warfare? Vehicular combat? Only in Battlefield moments? The stain on the franchise that is 2042 with how hard it chased trends rather than created all new ones? Whatever you thought of first when the name Battlefield was mentioned, I'm willing to bet that none of you thought about the single player first. Battlefield has had a rough time with single player campaigns, and it's not hard to see why. It's difficult to translate the open-ended sandbox nature of the meat and potatoes of each entry into a campaign that needs to tell a story with characters, motivations, differing set pieces, and more. Elements from the multiplayer have been included to some degree in every Battlefield campaign, but most of them feature linear on-rails gameplay. Gameplay that does allow the devs to craft character development, a narrative, utilize different set pieces, and more, at the expense of what the core of Battlefield is gameplay-wise. Then again, a game deviating from the core of what a series is known for is not inherently a bad thing. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, for example, did a total 180 from the stealth-focused gameplay the Metal Gear franchise is known for, and yet it's a widely beloved title by people, myself included. Focusing back on Battlefield, Bad Company's campaign is seen in a positive light by lots of people thanks to how likable the characters are.
Where did Hackett go?
There's gold in them hills!
Shh, that's a neutral zone. Hackett, fall back!
He can't hear you, Sarge. If he could, he wouldn't listen.
I hate to say this, but we have to go and get him back.
Do we really have to go and get him back? I mean, have to?
Move out.
The semi-open world of each level helps as well, but at the end of the day, it's still the same objectives, you just get to choose the order in which you tackle them in some instances. Battlefield 1 is the other campaign that stands out to people with switching between different characters and environments through war stories. Other than that, the other campaigns have ranged from mediocre to awful. However, if you take a trip back in time to 2005, you'll find a Battlefield campaign that to this day is the closest the franchise has gotten to blending the elements of multiplayer in with a single-player campaign. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat was released on October 24th, 2005, not to be confused with the PC-exclusive Battlefield 2 that was released in June of that same year, sporting a whole different engine and gameplay loop, along with being released for both 6th and 7th gen consoles. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat is not a watered-down console port. Rather, it's a whole different game to its big brother. Even then, calling Battlefield 2 a big brother is perhaps a little misleading, as the 2 was only added to Modern Combat's title right before launch in an attempt to boost sales. The biggest difference between these games is the fact that Modern Combat contains the franchise's first ever single-player campaign. Back then, there were only bot matches when it came to any kind of single-player content, meant to be a training mode or alternative means of play if someone didn't have an internet connection. At the end of the day, though, it was still the normal multiplayer, just with bots instead of other human players. Modern Combat still retains a lot of the multiplayer aspects of the franchise, such as multiple classes, vehicles being thrown into the mix allowing for combined arms warfare, and multiple lives given you lose only when all of your reinforcements are drained. But those aspects are mixed around and changed as needed depending on the campaign level in question. Modern Combat's campaign attempts to walk the tightrope of offering enough freedom to retain the core of the multiplayer side of things, but also making sure to be restrictive enough to allow for different specific objectives that can only be given to the player in a single-player campaign setting. Was that attempt successful? Battlefield 2 Modern Combat's campaign takes place in Kazakhstan, where NATO and Chinese forces clash in combat. After negotiations and peace talks in the midst of the initial skirmishes end in disaster due to a helicopter attack that both sides blame the other for doing, open war breaks out. Because this game doesn't focus on any specific characters in the midst of the combat or a story within the war taking place, there's not much in the way of a plot for this game. It's there to set up a reason for these two armies going to war against one another, and for what this game was trying to achieve, that's all it needed to do. Modern Combat instead focuses on the gameplay of the missions, which is what we'll be taking a look at next. Battlefield has had the class system ever since the first entry in the series with 1942. Different weapons and pieces of equipment that are exclusive to a particular class gives each one strengths to take advantage of and weaknesses to defend against, allowing for different roles in combat. Assault, Sniper, Spec Ops, Engineer, and Support are the classes we're given here. Assault troops are your regular frontline soldiers. Armed with a standard scoped assault rifle, grenade launcher, frag, and smoke grenades, this is the perfect anti-infantry frontline class. Snipers are your long-range troops. Armed with a sniper rifle, laser designator for missile strikes, smoke grenades, and a motion sensor, this class is the one to hang back so they can deal their fair share of damage from afar. Spec Ops troops specialize in sabotage and quick movements. Armed with suppressed SMGs, C4, and stun grenades, these troops like to get up close and personal while remaining mobile. Engineers are the vehicle-centered troops. Armed with shotguns, anti-tank rocket launchers and mines, and a repair tool to patch up friendly vehicles, this is the class to swap to when the armor starts rolling in. Lastly, the Support class. Armed with LMGs, first aid, and the ability to call in mortar strikes, support troops are here to suppress enemies under a storm of bullets and heal allies. Each class serves their role well in the sandbox, and no class feels either super over or underpowered. What makes these classes stand out more is due to how often you'll be swapping between them due to the game's most well-known feature, hot swapping.
All 4 sites and get the intelligence back safely for analysis.
Hot swapping allows you to swap between the friendly soldiers on the field with you at any moment. Got some enemy armor rolling up while you're currently the assault class? Hot swap to an engineer. Cleared out an objective that requires you to fly low to get recon data? Hot swap to the recon helicopter. Is the next objective rather far? No need to walk over there, just hot swap to the ally that spawned there. If you die, after a few seconds, the game will automatically hot swap to the closest ally. This mechanic allows for unprecedented levels of versatility within each mission. This is something that can only be done in a single-player environment and compensates for the fact that your allies aren't human players. And this mechanic isn't even a crutch, as you can still easily die if you're careless. Though a lot of deaths in this game are the result of cheap encounters and bad level design, which we'll get to in a bit. It rides the line between giving the player enough versatility to ensure they don't feel restricted when playing, but also making sure they can't just cheese the game by swapping between the various classes on the fly. You can't just pull a one-man army from the good Modern Warfare 2 and just change classes right then and there. You have to hot swap to someone else who is alive on the battlefield. I also really like how you can freely swap between infantry and vehicles too. You don't have to wait to spawn in a vehicle from any sort of menu. The vehicles themselves are all balanced nicely for what their roles are. Transport helicopters, attack helicopters, scout helicopters, jeeps, IFVs, tanks, boats, all of these vehicles serve their role in the battle taking place. Of course, depending on the mission, some vehicles or all of them may be excluded to fit the mission's needs, which does make their use more situational. Situational or not, the vehicles all serve their roles well and add to the battle taking place. Hot swapping can also come in handy for keeping up your score multiplier. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat takes a more arcade-like approach with how it handles scoring. Rather than there being no score at all, this game gives you a total score depending on how much you decimated the enemies during a particular level, multipliers coming into effect for going on kill streaks and not dying. You also get some temporary upgrades like increased health, armor, faster fire rate, faster reload speeds, and more for keeping up your combo. These upgrades slowly but surely go away over time if you aren't killing enemies. In the case that you die, those upgrades along with the multiplier you had both go away. Hot swaps allow you to keep that multiplier and those upgrades going since those don't count as deaths. At the end of a mission, you're given stars for how well you did, how much score you got, how fast you completed the mission, how efficient you were with your weapons, which I don't know what counts as average versus efficient versus expert weapon use, maybe how high of a kill streak you had going, and your accuracy. Stars can be taken away from your final total if you and your allies died a certain number of times. These stars all combine to your overall rank, which doesn't have any benefits other than giving you something to go after. What does have an effect on the gameplay are the weapon upgrades. Upon earning a total number of stars at any point during your playtime of this game, you will earn upgrades to the weapons and gadgets for each class. One major benefit of hot swapping is that mission variety can really come into play here. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat has a good range of what you need to do within missions. Defending a building, swapping between Little Birds and a Black Hawk to clear out areas before flying low over them for recon data, an attack on a chemical plant, tank-on-tank combat, and more. Now, whether these different missions play well is a different story. All of this sounds pretty neat so far, right? A Battlefield campaign that resembles what the multiplayer, what people are most familiar with, is like. You're able to hot swap between different units and vehicles on the fly, there's good mission variety, there's a progression system with there being ranks and weapon upgrades. It all seems like this campaign is turning out to be really solid, right? That's what it seems like, and credit where it's due, the opening levels start off quite strong, but once you get through those opening levels, and once those objectives become more demanding and the battles become larger, both in scale and time, that is when the faults that this game has is put on full display. And unfortunately, as I'll explain now, those faults all combine to make this game's campaign painful to get through, particularly in the latter half. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat's levels are something alright. There's more to it than just the placement of things like objectives and the flow of the missions, so please bear with me here. I mentioned at the start that this game is the closest the franchise has gotten to blending the multiplayer elements in with the single player. I never said those elements were blended well. In Modern Combat's levels, most of the time you'll either need to wipe out enemies in a specific area, defend a specific area for X amount of minutes, plant charges and blow up a target, or eliminate some kind of HVT. Those sound like your standard objectives in a military first-person shooter, so things are on track so far. However, that is all derailed fast, as the issue of clunky feeling controls, what classes are made available to you for a mission, the level design itself, like what paths you can take to complete an objective for instance, and the performance of the AI both for allies and enemies make themselves known. The best way that I can describe how the controls are is that precision movements are basically impossible. Whenever you change the direction that you're walking or take aim with your weapon, it's like things start off slow but then pick up at full speed as if you have variable sensitivity. This makes entering narrow paths or doors or taking aim with a precision weapon like a sniper rifle more challenging. Enemies that are on foot have generous hitboxes, which, regardless if this was done in response to the clunky feeling controls or not, does help things, I will say. However, those generous hitboxes also apply to you, which means that some deaths you will be swearing up and down that you were behind cover. It may be true that your soldier model was behind cover, but whether your hitbox was behind cover is a different story. Taking a look at the classes again, although they are present in this game, there is a huge flaw to them. Not all classes are present for all of the missions. That's right, some classes are entirely omitted from specific missions of the campaign. Take Mission 10, Burning Bridges, for example, where you have one sniper with the other soldiers being exclusively Spec Ops troops. Most of your threats are against infantry, but 2 enemy helicopters also spawn in this mission. You have the sniper's laser designator to target the helicopters, but if that sniper gets killed, you're SOL unless you want to retreat and hop between the MGs placed throughout the level. No engineers with rocket launchers spawn in this mission, meaning you'll have to dodge helicopter fire as you plant those charges or backtrack and go out of your way to deal with it. Or take Mission 11, Beach Party, as another example. Here you're storming a beach and making your way through trenches and close quarters combat. You have access to the engineer, sniper, and medic classes, with the objective being to destroy 2 tanks that are aiding with defending the beach. You have the means to destroy the tanks easily enough with the engineer's rocket launcher, the medic's mortar strike, or the sniper's laser designator. But when it comes to fighting the enemy infantry in the trenches, this is when the level goes from an epic beach landing to an unfun bloodbath. The shotguns in this level are all pump action, along with the damage they deal being inconsistent if you don't hit enemies dead center. LMGs are bulky and as a result handle poorly up close. Sniper rifles, I don't even need to explain why they're terrible up close, all while the enemies have access to their own fully automatic weapons that can tear you to shreds. This is where a class like the Spec Ops class should be introduced, as they specialize in close quarters engagements with their suppressed SMGs and higher mobility. Fighting your way to the tanks that you need to destroy could have been made less painful if these unnecessary restrictions on what classes are available weren't there. Or take Mission 14, Top Man, as a third example. You're tasked with eliminating a Chinese field commander. You fly in low, clear the LZ, land, and make your way through the narrow path with machine guns all aimed right at you. No medic class to heal allies, no assault class to utilize their smoke grenades to throw in front of the MGs or regular grenades to throw directly behind them, no snipers to take shots at the defenders from afar, nothing else. It's only after the helicopter fight begins that you get access to the sniper class through a single soldier. What are you going to do as the Spec Ops class against those MGs? Throw some C4s as if they're frisbees? I get that this is a campaign, so some restrictions have to be in place so it's not just a multiplayer match but with extra steps. But restricting the available classes in the missions is not the way to go about it. This is just making things unnecessarily difficult for the sake of it. Highlighting another example of bad level design, take Mission 15, DMZ. This level has you clearing out 3 different areas under NATO control. One of these areas is perfectly fine, battling helicopters and Humvees. Another area is a little tedious with prolonged sniper fights, but nothing too crazy. Then there's a third area, which is the worst of them all. Here, you have to push your way through a narrow path, all while the enemy has MGs facing your direction. You do have an MG and a grenade launcher turret facing where the enemy is coming from to help you out, but given the sheer number of enemies that spawn in each wave, you'll be overwhelmed. The worst part, these enemies will continue spawning in waves until you push up to force them to spawn further in the spot that you're trying to capture. This wouldn't be so bad if there wasn't only a single narrow path to get there. This results in yet another painful meat grinder. To add insult to injury, once you actually get to the spot you're tasked with capturing, the enemies will continue spawning in waves for another few minutes, which just pads out the runtime of this level. There isn't anything unique or interesting that happens during these additional waves of enemies. It's just the same song and dance over and over and over again until the game finally admits defeat and hands the territory over to you. Perhaps the pain of there being only certain classes available at any given moment and linear meat grinds of levels can be lessened if the AI is programmed well. If your allies can deal their fair share of damage, and if the enemies fight efficiently but fairly, then maybe I could be a little more forgiving towards this game?
Target is below.
Oh god, the problems just keep on adding up. Yeah, the AI in this game sucks for the most part. I say for the most part because the friendly AI can actually do a decent job at fighting enemies at times. Of course, there are moments where the AI will choke, but they fight well enough for me to say that just from a pure combat standpoint, the friendly AI is good enough. The enemy AI is also good enough, with the only instances of them stepping into the bullshit territory being intentional meat grinders where either you don't have the optimal class available to you, which that's more on the game's part and not the enemy AI's part admittedly, or you're up against multiple MG nests. Where the AI in this game takes a turn for the worst is in regard to any objectives outside of killing enemies. Taking or defending a general area where the only thing you have to do in order to complete that objective is kill enemies, the friendly AI can do that just fine. When it comes to anything like planting explosives or eliminating an HVT though, the friendly AI will do jack shit. This means that for some objectives, it'll just be you versus all of the enemy defenders. Got explosives that need to be planted inside a building? All of your allies will continue fighting outside and not dare to step inside with you, leaving you to solo breach and clear all of the floors to place those explosives on your own. Got an HVT that needs eliminating? Your friendly AI will all leave that job to you as they're so busy fighting the other enemies. If instances like these were a Call of Duty style linear campaign where it was intentionally set up for you to solo breach and clear a building with things like reduced enemies and readily available health packs or regenerative health, then this would be fine. But because this is meant to be a blending of the multiplayer elements of this game and a single player campaign, because of the rules that this campaign abides by in regard to enemies, what classes are available, the specific objectives, and more, it all falls apart here. All of these elements working against the game are already bad enough. They show up in various combinations to varying degrees of severity in each mission of the campaign. Where things are at their absolute worst is in the last mission of the campaign, Flying the Flag. Those of you who have played this game to the end know why things are at their absolute worst here. For those of you who haven't, allow me to explain why. After you complete the second to last mission, Endgame, where you get to choose to fight what is supposed to be the final battle of the war as either NATO or the Chinese, someone decides to make a declaration to the world. Commander 31, the leader of an organization called the Burning Flag, reveals that he was the one to spark the war in the first place by sending in the Hind that killed the negotiators at the end of the third mission. Depending on whether you won the war as either NATO or the Chinese, he'll have 3 ICBMs targeting either the US and Europe or China in the Middle East. Your objective is to stop the ICBMs from launching and to kill Commander 31. As soon as you parachute down to the ground, a 10-minute timer begins, or a 5-minute timer if you're on the 6th generation version. Oh God. And this is where everything falls apart. This game has one more set of meat grinders for you, as you're spawned within the line of sight of MG nests on the hills of both paths that lead to the first 2 ICBMs you have to stop. Then when you get to the top of the silos, you'll have additional MGs waiting for you, who can apparently shoot through the hill that you're taking cover behind thanks to the generous hitboxes being applied to you too. And it's not like you can keep up the pressure if you die, as your allies who have an irrational fear of playing the objective will more than likely be off in the distance, preoccupied with meaningless fights that's just wasting time. If you manage to somehow clear everyone on top of the silo, you still have to clear out everyone inside. Oh, and did I mention that you only have the assault, engineer, and sniper classes in this level? No medics to heal you, and no spec ops troops that specialize in close quarters engagements. If you manage to somehow eliminate everyone inside, you place the explosive, and boom, that's one silo down. Now you have to do that all over again for the other silo. So you chip away at the enemies manning the MGs, hoping to get lucky with a grenade throw or to chip away at least some of their health before you die. Eventually, you manage to eliminate everyone, slowly but surely clear out the inside, but oopsie, even though you planted the explosive on the launch controls, you're just a few seconds late. If you place the second charge when there's less than 10 seconds left on the clock, the game will take you to the game over cinematic and debrief once the timer hits 0, as the condition of the timer hitting 0 is apparently the only thing the game is looking for in regard to its game over condition, not if there's less than 10 seconds left on the clock, and also checking to see if you've planted the charge. It's not that difficult to add a second condition to check for. Just add 2 ampersands to your if statement, followed up with something like explosive armed equals true or something. Or better yet, just stop the timer once the second charge is planted. If second explosive armed equals true, then destroy the instance of the timer in the game. And even if you stop the first 2 missiles from launching, you have to march your way through a storm of bullets to get to Commander 31 and the last ICBM to have sniper units spawn in so you can laser designate the bunker to stop both of them. All of the game's worst elements all combine to make this the worst level of the campaign and one of the worst levels in gaming that I've had the displeasure of playing. This level can go straight to hell! So yeah, the latter half of the campaign is pretty grueling to get through, particularly the last mission. This campaign starts off strong, but as you get further into it, things start to steadily fall apart until the last mission where it's just dust and rubble at that point. As a result, the campaign overall is an unenjoyable mess that will have your controller sweating as you get closer and closer to wanting to destroy it out of frustration. Yes, I am speaking from personal experience here, but thankfully, my Xbox controller is still safe and sound. Well, is there anything else that this game can provide to make the overall package better? There's a challenge mode that lets you participate in hot swap time trials along with score attack levels with certain weapons and vehicles, but other than that, there's nothing else here. The multiplayer for this game has been dead for a long while at this point, so I'm unable to cover that, and with no other single player offerings to speak of, that's it for this game. I have to give credit where it's due. I appreciate that DICE did their best to have the single player resemble the multiplayer as much as possible here. And the hot swapping mechanic is really cool, both in concept and in execution. That being said, resemblances and cool gameplay mechanics can only take a game so far before the faults catch up. And with this game, the faults are numerous enough that it sours the gameplay experience to the point of it being unenjoyable in the latter half. This is one of those games where towards the end, I just wanted it to be done. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why that kind of thinking is hardly ever a good thing. It was neat to see the franchise's first attempt at a single-player campaign, and it was cool to see it resemble the multiplayer more closely than any of the campaigns since, but man, it is really rough to play. I cannot recommend this title unless you're an absolute die-hard Battlefield fan, and even then, I imagine that this game will test your patience at some point.